Welcome to the Bible and today's culture. So our goal here is to understand God's thinking. What is the mind of God like when he created this world, and what does he expect of us as his co-managers of his creation? So the Old Testament says we're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul. So mind is in there, which says, what is God's worldview? What is his thinking? What is his purpose on what he's done, and how we can get in alignment with that? In the New Testament, it says a similar thing. It says we are to have the mind of Christ. So as we get into this, we're going to start by comparing two cultures. We've chosen two cultures that have the same natural resources. They're from the same part of the world. And we've chosen two cultures that have a similar DNA. So personally, their history, biologically, is similar. And here they are. And we're using Nobel Prize winners as our measuring tool of the effectiveness of these two cultures. So we have the Arab Islamic culture and the Jewish culture. Let's look at the size of these two groups. The Islamic Arab culture is 1.7 billion. The Jewish culture is 14.6 million. That means for every one Jewish person in the world, there are 1,164 Muslim Arab members. Now, in terms of Nobel Prizes, the Arab Islamic culture has won 8 since it was started about 1900. That means they've won 1.3% of all of the Nobel Prizes that have been given out. Nobel Prizes give out 5 awards a year: medicine, chemistry, physics, literature, and peace. Okay? And out of all of those, Arab Islamic culture has won 1.3%. The Jewish culture has won 208 Nobel Prizes, where they've won 22% of all the Nobel Prizes given out since 1900. It's a pretty amazing success rate. 14 million people have won 22%, and 1.7 billion have won 1.3%. So the question is, what's the difference between the two? My suggestion would be the worldview and the culture come from the Jewish adherence to the Bible and to Moses' teaching. So where would you like your culture, your worldview to come from? That's why we're studying what we are. What does the Bible have to say about God's view of the 8 domains of culture and how he wants to see them function? And they have worked out pretty successfully for the Jewish people. Okay, we're on now to health and science. Our subject today is germs and infections. Pretty exciting, huh? All right. We're going to start with skin problems. And in Leviticus, Moses gives us some directions that he got from God on what we should do when we have skin problems. When someone has a burn on his skin and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot. And if the hair in it has turned white and it appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. So, the first question I come up is, what's the priest got to do with this? I mean, if you had a burn on your skin, you wouldn't call the pastor of your church to come out and take a look at it. But the priests are doing it. Well, the reason for this is we obey doctors. Doctors tell us you need to take this pill or you need to have this procedure done for you. And we generally say yes, because he's smarter and we count him as an authority. Well, who was the authority in these times? It was the priests. The priests had the authority because they had memorized scripture. They knew what Moses had taught about all these things. And they were the ones that says, this is what God is saying. So they weren't speaking for themselves. They were speaking from their knowledge of Moses' teaching. So we're beginning to understand that God was biologically correct in what he says. This is what they say today. Cellulitis is a common bacterial skin infection that is usually painful. Skin infections can spread beyond the skin and into the bloodstream. When this happens, it becomes life-threatening. So let's go on with what should happen to this person who had this burn that was infected. If the priest examines it and there's no white hair in the spot, and if it's not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. Well, it looks like it's probably not infectious, but they're not taking any chances, so he stays by himself for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him, and if it has spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious disease. If, however, the spot is unchanged, and it is not spread in the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. This is a rigorous test being given by God on what you do to make sure that we're not going to spread one disease to another person. Another issue that came up was about fluids that come from our body. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Give these further instructions to the Israelites. Any man who has a genital discharge is ceremonially unclean because of it." So there's a genuine concern about things that come out of our body that are not natural and may be infectious. Then he went on, any bedding on which this person lies and anything on which he sits will be defiled. So if you touch a man's bedding, you will be required to wash your clothes and bathe in water, and you will remain ceremonially defiled until evening. So if you pick up his clothes, you may get the germs on you. And you wash in the water of purification, right, to kill the germs. The same instructions apply if you touch the man who has the unclean discharge. And if he spits on you, you must undergo the same procedures, and you will be required to wash your clothes and bathe in the water of purification again. So this became an active thing in our country around 1900. In 1880, Louis Pasteur came up with the germ theory, and he was trying to find out why TB spread and rabies spread. And he realized there were germs, and they could spread through the air, through touching, through different ways. And so spittoons were all around in those days. Every place where men gathered, in offices, in men's clubs, in taverns, there were spittoons. And because they were chewing a lot of tobacco, so they would spit in the spittoon. Pretty soon began to realize that spitting was letting the germs of tuberculosis spread in the air to other people. So over a number of 10 years or so, all the spittoons went away. That wasn't here. But the NBA got concerned about spitting when Magic Johnson revealed in 1991 that he had HIV. They put a rule in saying no spitting on the courts in the NBA. They were only 3,400 years behind Moses, but it was a good rule. Also bleeding. Most sports do not allow you play anymore if you're bleeding. You have to go off the field, stop bleeding, put a Band-Aid on, whatever you need to do so that you don't spread your bodily fluids to someone else in the midst of your sport. Today, sexually transmitted diseases can cause penal discharge, just like they did with Moses. And this report from iLab, the citation isn't on there, but it's from iLab online. It says, if you are sexually active, getting tested is crucial. Luckily, testing from home is quick and easy. Here's how it works. Order it online, collect the sample, return the sample for testing, and online you receive a lab-certified result of whether you have an infectious disease or not. The point is, it's easy for us today. In Israel, they could not send in for test samples. So God created this procedure led by the priests to make sure that diseases weren't transmitted. Germs and infections. What happens if someone dies in a tent and you're in the tent with them when they die? Number one, if those who enter that tent will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. That's in Numbers 19. That's pretty much like COVID, isn't it? I mean, we came in contact with somebody that had COVID, or we learned the next day they broke out with it and they were probably infectious when we were with them. We went into quarantine. That's the same thing that's happening here. Number two, any container in the tent that was not covered with a lid is also defiled. What's about that? Well, we know that you were in a confined space, you're breathing, some of those germs are coming out, and if you had a container that was handling food or anything else and there was not a lid on it, then the germs could go inside of that, and there was no way of washing them out. The container is pottery, it's rough, it's porous, and to protect yourself, you need to be quarantined, and you need to get rid of that container. In fact, in Leviticus, it goes a little farther. If a pottery container is touched by someone with a discharge, you must break it. There's no way of cleaning it. And so they would break their kitchen utensils because somebody that had a discharge touched them. Let me introduce you to Ignatius Semmelweis. He lived in the 1800s. And he was a doctor. He worked in the birthing units, and he worked at the Queen's Hospital in Vienna. At that time, 25 to 30% of mothers giving birth died. I mean, 1 in 4 women giving birth died in Europe. This was terrible. Well, Semmelweis had this idea of cause and effect. He said, when someone gets sick, there's a cause for it. We've got to figure out what that cause was. Well, he made many guesses about cause and effect. Some of them worked. A lot of them were really strange and didn't work. He had the right idea, but there wasn't a lot of science behind it. And he began to be ridiculed. And the doctor said, oh, here's Ignatius again with his new idea. Well, he was working in the Queen's Hospital, and he was noticing that they were on the same floor as a morgue, and that particularly student doctors were in the morgue dissecting dead bodies to find out why people died or how the body worked. And someone next door in the birthing unit would call out, Mrs. Jones is about ready to give birth. So the doctor would leave his dead body, run into the birthing unit, not washing his hands or doing anything, and give birth to the child. Of course, it was very likely he infected both the child and the mom in the process. So Ignatius thought he saw a cause and effect thing here. So he said, we're going to wash our hands before we go into the birthing unit. So he told all the doctors, you're going to wash in water and chlorinated lime mixed into it. So they did that. All of a sudden, the mortality rate in the birthing unit dropped to 1%. It was amazing. And he began to tell everybody. All the other doctors in Europe said, there's Ignatius again, the latest crazy idea. And they did nothing. And it wasn't until 1880, when Pasteur discovered this germ theory, that people began to realize that we transmit germs to people in ways that we never think about. It was called childbed fever. Only years after Samuel Weiss died did Louis Pasteur develop the germ theory of disease in 1880. He, Pasteur, became world famous for his discovery. So until Pasteur, no one knew anything about microscopic germs except God and Moses and the priest. Well, they didn't understand germs. They just understood what God had told them to do. In 2000, I was in the hospital and I saw something I'd never seen in a hospital before. And I was a patient, so I'm laying there in bed and I noticed there was a sign on the wall. I photographed this in, but it was just like this. And it was a sign for the patient. And it says, ask your nurse to wash her hands before you come in. And next to it over here on the wall would have been a Purell dispenser. So here we are. The nurses had not had the habit of coming from all the other patients and then washing their hands before they came in. And they put the responsibility on the patient. Ask your nurse to wash her hands before she comes in. So Purell had been invented in 1987, 88, and had been approved for sale in 1997. So about this time in 2000, it was getting around into the hospitals. So here's a short history of germ knowledge. 1400 BC, God told Israel to wash in the water of purification. In 1847, Samuel Weiss, a Hungarian doctor, suggested doctors should wash their hands between patients. In 1880, Pasteur created germ theory. Ignatius was ridiculed. In the late 1800s, they gave out an award to Pasteur. In 2000 AD, Purell dispensers were introduced into U.S. hospitals. What would have happened if we had been following God's rules in this world from 1400 BC until 2000? We would have saved millions of lives, prevented many diseases. So here's your discussion questions. Read them, answer them. Don't forget to watch this wonderful video called Nature Spirals. It's how inventors are looking at how God does things and copying them and finding that they are so much more efficient at what they're doing than what we currently have. And they're mimicking God to find better processes. Think about this question for the class next week. During the week, answer this question. What biblical command was recently discovered to reduce the spread of sexually transmitted diseases? Okay, one more time. What biblical command was recently discovered to reduce the spread of sexually transmitted diseases? So here's your discussion questions. Don't miss the video. We'll see you next week. Thanks.